Billionaire mocked his wife for being fat, but karma taught him the hardest lesson. There is an ancient wisdom whispered among our people that says a man who despises the vessel that carried him across troubled waters will one day find himself drowning with no boat to save him. Money, our elders tell us, can build magnificent houses with golden gates and marble floors, but it cannot purchase the warmth of a loving heart or the peace that comes from a home filled with genuine affection. This is not a tale spun from fantasy or decorated with impossible miracles. This is the story of a man named Michael Anderson, a wealthy businessman who allowed success to blind him to the treasure he already possessed, and how life itself became his teacher in the hardest classroom of all. It is a story about Grace, his wife, a woman whose worth could not be measured by the scales society uses to judge beauty, and how karma moves silently through our lives, watching, waiting, and striking precisely when the lesson needs to be learned most desperately. Michael Anderson did not inherit his wealth from generations of privilege or receive it as a gift from distant relatives who struck gold in foreign lands. No, his story began in the cramped quarters of a single room in the densely packed neighborhood of Mushin in Lagos, where zinc roofs rattled violently during rainstorms and the walls were so thin that neighbors could hear each other's conversations, arguments, and midnight prayers. He was an intelligent man, sharp-minded and ambitious, with dreams that stretched far beyond the narrow streets where he grew up. But intelligence alone does not fill an empty stomach or pay mounting debts. Life had dealt him a difficult hand, and for years he struggled, moving from one failed job interview to another, watching younger men with connections climb ladders he could not even reach. His clothes were few, often washed and reworn until the fabric thinned, and his shoes had holes that let in rainwater during the wet season, soaking his socks and reminding him daily of his position in the world. But beside him, through all of this, stood Grace, his wife, a woman whose physical frame did not fit the narrow standards celebrated in glossy magazines or on television screens. Grace was a large woman, generously built, with soft arms that could embrace you until sadness melted away, and a smile that seemed to carry its own sunlight even on the darkest days. Her laughter was infectious, rolling through rooms like music, and her spirit was unbreakable, forged in the fires of hardship and tempered by unwavering faith. They had married when both were young and hopeful, standing before a small congregation in a modest church ceremony that cost less than what some people spent on a single pair of shoes. Grace wore a simple white dress that her mother had sewn by hand, and Michael stood beside her in a borrowed suit that was slightly too large for his thin frame. The guests were few, mostly family members and close friends who brought what they could afford as gifts, plates, cups, a small electric fan that would become their most prized possession during hot nights when sleep refused to come. The reception was held in Grace's family compound under a makeshift canopy of cloth tied between poles, and the food was jollof rice and chicken prepared by aunties who sang traditional songs while they cooked. It was not glamorous by any measure, but it was filled with genuine joy, the kind that money cannot manufacture or replicate. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Grace whispered into Michael's ear with tears in her eyes, "We may not have much now, my love, but I believe in you. I see greatness in you that the world hasn't recognized yet, and I will stand beside you until that day comes." Michael had held her tightly then, feeling both gratitude and a burning determination to prove her faith in him was not misplaced. Their early years of marriage were marked by struggles that would have broken weaker unions. They lived in that single room where everything happened in one space, cooking, eating, sleeping, and entertaining the few visitors who came to see them. The room was so small that when Grace spread their sleeping mat at night, it covered almost the entire floor, leaving barely enough space to walk around. Their belongings were minimal: a wooden box that served as their wardrobe, a small kerosene stove for cooking, a few pots and plates, and that precious electric fan that had been a wedding gift. The ceiling leaked during heavy rains, and Grace would place buckets strategically around the room to catch the water, creating a rhythmic symphony of dripping that became the soundtrack to their nights. Sometimes the water would overflow, and they would wake up to find their mat soaked, forcing them to spend the rest of the night sitting upright, waiting for morning. During the dry season, the heat was unbearable, turning their small room into an oven that baked them slowly, and they would take turns fanning each other with folded newspapers while sweat poured down their faces. But through it all, Grace never complained. Not once did Michael hear her voice rise in frustration or bitterness about their circumstances. Instead, she would wake up each morning before dawn, say her prayers quietly while Michael still slept, and then begin preparing for the day ahead with a determination that amazed him. Grace became the backbone of their survival, the pillar that held their small world together when everything seemed ready to collapse. She started a small business, frying akara by the roadside, waking up at 4 in the morning to soak beans, grind them, and prepare the oil for frying. By 6 o'clock, she would be positioned at her usual spot near the bus stop, calling out to early morning commuters who rushed past on their way to work. Her akara was delicious, perfectly seasoned and fried to a golden brown that made people stop, even when they had not planned to buy anything. She would stand there for hours, her feet swelling in cheap slippers, her face glistening with sweat and oil, serving customer after customer with a smile that never faded regardless of how tired she felt. On good days, she would sell out everything by noon and return home with money tied in the corner of her wrapper, her heart full of gratitude. On slow days, she would stay until evening, hoping to sell the last few pieces so nothing would go to waste. Every kobo she earned was brought home and placed in Michael's hands with the same instruction: take this and keep looking for opportunities, buy newspapers, pay for transport to interviews, never stop trying because I know your breakthrough is coming. Michael would look at her tired face, see the oil stains on her clothes and the exhaustion in her eyes, and feel a mixture of gratitude, shame, and determination burning in his chest. In addition to frying akara, Grace took on other jobs to supplement their income and support Michael's job search. She washed clothes for neighbors who could afford to pay someone else to do their laundry, spending hours bent over buckets of soapy water, scrubbing fabric until her knuckles were raw and her back ached with a persistent pain that never fully went away. She cleaned offices in the evenings, mopping floors and wiping down desks after everyone had gone home, working in empty buildings where her footsteps echoed in the silence. Sometimes she helped women in the market carry heavy loads, using her strength to earn a few extra naira that would help buy food for dinner. Through all of this physical labor, her body grew larger, her frame expanding from the combination of stress, irregular eating patterns, and the little rest she allowed herself. But to Michael, during those early years, her size meant nothing. When he looked at Grace, he saw his savior, his partner, his rock. He saw the woman who believed in him when the world had written him off as another failed dreamer, who fed him when she had barely eaten herself, who massaged his shoulders when depression tried to crush his spirit, and who whispered words of encouragement into his ears during nights when he wanted to give up on everything. They had 2 children during these difficult years, a daughter they named Blessing and a son they called Victor. Blessing was 8 years old now, a bright-eyed girl with her mother's smile and her father's intelligence, who loved school despite the fact that her uniform was patched in several places and her shoes were worn down at the heels. Victor was 5, an energetic boy who filled their small room with noise and laughter, who didn't understand why they couldn't afford the toys other children had, but never complained because he saw how hard his parents worked. Grace carried the weight of motherhood with the same quiet strength she brought to everything else in her life. She would wake up even earlier to prepare the children for school, bathing them with water she had fetched from the communal well, combing their hair and making sure they ate something before leaving the house. She sewed their school uniforms herself, sitting under lamplight late at night with needle and thread, her fingers moving with practiced precision even as her eyes grew heavy with sleep. When Blessing came home crying because other children had mocked her patched uniform, Grace held her close and told her that clothes do not determine a person's worth, that what matters is the content of your character and the knowledge in your head. When Victor fell sick with malaria and they had no money for the hospital, Grace carried him on her back and walked from one pharmacy to another, begging for medication on credit, promising to pay as soon as she could, her maternal instinct overriding any shame she might have felt. Michael watched all of this, saw how Grace sacrificed every comfort for their family, and felt both inspired and ashamed. Inspired because her strength pushed him to keep trying, to wake up each day and face another round of rejections. to believe that somewhere out there was an opportunity with his name on it. Ashamed because he felt like he was failing as a man, unable to provide for his family in the way he had dreamed, dependent on his wife's daily hustle to put food on their table. Some nights, after Grace had fallen asleep exhausted from the day's labor, Michael would lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the rats scurrying in the corners of their room, and fight against the darkness that whispered he was worthless, that he would never amount to anything, that Grace had made a terrible mistake marrying him. But then morning would come, and Grace would wake up with that same smile, kiss his forehead, and say something that renewed his hope. "Today might be the day, my love. Today might be when everything changes, so get up and keep fighting." And Michael would rise, fueled by her belief in him, and step out into the world one more time. The breakthrough came on an ordinary Tuesday morning that started like every other day. Grace had heard from a woman who bought akara from her regularly that a large telecommunications company was hiring for various positions, and she rushed home with the news, her eyes bright with excitement. "Michael," she said breathlessly, "there is an interview happening today at that big company on Victoria Island, the one we always see on television. You have to go right now. Wear your best shirt, comb your hair properly, and go show them what you are capable of." Michael hesitated, his spirit worn down by countless rejections, his confidence eroded by years of hearing that he was not qualified enough, not experienced enough, not connected enough. "Grace," he said tiredly, "I have tried so many times. These big companies do not want people like me. They want people with connections, people who know somebody who knows somebody. I am just wasting time and transport money." But Grace would not accept his defeated tone. She stood in front of him, placed both hands on his shoulders, and looked directly into his eyes with an intensity that made him pay attention. "Listen to me, Michael Anderson," she said firmly. "If you sit in this room feeling sorry for yourself, nothing will ever change. If you do not go to that interview, you will never know what could have happened. I did not marry a coward. I married a man with intelligence and potential. So stop hiding behind fear and go out there and show them who you are. And if they reject you again, at least you tried. But I will not let you rot in this room because you are afraid of another. No." Her words lit a fire in his chest, burning away the fog of depression that had settled over him, and he found himself nodding, moving, getting ready. Grace helped him prepare with the care and attention of someone dressing a king for a coronation. She pressed his one good shirt with a coal iron borrowed from a neighbor, making sure every wrinkle was smoothed out until the fabric looked almost new. She polished his worn shoes with a mixture of black shoe polish and a little petroleum jelly, rubbing until they shone despite the cracks in the leather. She gave him the last of the money from her akara sales for transport, pressing the notes into his palm and closing his fingers around them. "This is all we have," she said, "but it is enough to get you there and back. Go and make me proud, my love." Michael looked at her standing there in her faded wrapper, her face shining with hope, and felt something shift inside him. He pulled her into a tight embrace, inhaling the familiar scent of her coconut oil and honest sweat, and whispered, "I will do this for you, for our children, for us." She smiled and patted his back gently. "I know you will. Now go before you are late." As Michael walked to the bus stop, he turned back once to see Grace standing in the doorway of their room, waving at him with both hands. And in that moment he made a silent vow that if God gave him this opportunity, he would never forget what she had done for him. The interview was challenging, filled with technical questions and scenarios that tested his knowledge and problem-solving abilities. But Michael surprised himself with how well he performed. Years of reading borrowed books and newspapers, of studying during sleepless nights while his family slept around him, had prepared him more than he realized. He answered confidently, drawing on knowledge he had accumulated through self-education, and the interview panel seemed impressed. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at their address, delivered by a courier who had to ask 3 different people for directions to find their small room in the maze of the neighborhood. When Michael opened the envelope with trembling hands and read the words, "We are pleased to offer you the position," he stood frozen for several seconds, unable to process what he was seeing. Then reality crashed over him like a wave and he ran outside shouting, "Grace, Grace, I got the job! I got the job!" Grace was at her akara stand when she heard the commotion, saw her husband running toward her with a paper waving in his hand, and she knew before he spoke what had happened. She abandoned her frying pan, not caring about the customers waiting, and ran to meet him, and they collided in the middle of the street, laughing and crying at the same time, holding each other while people stopped to stare. Neighbors who had watched their struggle came out of their rooms to congratulate them, sharing in their joy because everyone knew how hard they had fought to reach this moment. That night, Grace cooked a special meal with the little money they had, and the family sat together on their small mat, thanking God for answering their prayers and opening a door that had seemed permanently closed. Michael started his new job with dedication that impressed his supervisors from the very first day. He arrived early, stayed late, and threw himself into his work with the intensity of someone who understood what it meant to have nothing and was determined never to return to that place. His intelligence and work ethic did not go unnoticed, and within months he was being given more responsibilities, more complex projects, more opportunities to prove his capabilities. Grace continued her akara business at first, not wanting to depend entirely on one source of income until they were sure Michael's job was stable, but she encouraged him constantly, celebrated every small achievement, and prayed for his continued success. Their life began to change gradually, like dawn breaking slowly over the horizon. Michael's salary allowed them to move from their single room into a modest two-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood, and the day they carried their few belongings into that new space, Grace stood in the middle of the living room and wept. She walked from room to room, touching the walls as if to confirm they were real, and when she reached the kitchen, a real kitchen with a sink and counter space, she fell to her knees and thanked God aloud. Michael found her there and helped her up, and they held each other in that empty kitchen, both remembering the kerosene stove and the leaking roof and the cramped space where their dreams had seemed impossible. As months turned into years, Michael's career trajectory continued its upward climb. His natural intelligence combined with relentless hard work made him stand out among his colleagues, and promotions came steadily. He moved from junior staff to senior officer, from senior officer to assistant manager, from assistant manager to full manager with a team under his supervision. His salary increased correspondingly, and the financial pressures that had defined their marriage began to ease and then disappear entirely. They could afford better schools for Blessing and Victor, schools with proper uniforms and qualified teachers and sports facilities. They could buy food without calculating every naira, could pay bills without anxiety, could even save money for the future. Grace slowly reduced and then stopped her akara business, though she kept the frying pan and utensils stored away as reminders of where they had come from. Michael bought her a small car, nothing extravagant but functional and reliable. And when he handed her the keys, he said, "You carried this family on your back for years. You walked long distances with heavy loads. You deserve to drive now." Grace accepted the gift with gratitude, but what she valued more than the car was the fact that Michael still seemed to remember their struggle, still treated her with respect and appreciation, still called her my queen and thanked her for standing by him. But something subtle was beginning to change in Michael, a shift so gradual that neither of them noticed it at first. As his professional world expanded, he found himself surrounded by different people, colleagues who lived different lifestyles, who had different values and priorities. The men he worked with had wives who looked a certain way, slim women who wore designer clothes and had their hair done at expensive salons, who carried themselves with a polished sophistication that came from years of comfort and privilege. During company events and social gatherings, Michael would stand with these men and their wives, and slowly, almost unconsciously, he began to see Grace differently. Where he had once seen strength and beauty, he began to see size and simplicity. Where he had once appreciated her warm laughter, he began to feel embarrassed by how loud it was in refined company. Where he had once loved her traditional way of dressing in wrappers and headtees, he began to wish she would wear more modern, fitted clothes like the other wives. The poison of comparison had entered his mind, and though he tried to push these thoughts away at first, they grew stronger with each passing month, fed by the toxic culture of his new social circle, where appearance mattered more than character and status was measured by superficial markers. The first critical comment came out almost accidentally one evening when they were getting ready for a company dinner. Grace had bought a new dress, a beautiful traditional akara design with bright colors that complemented her complexion, and she was excited to wear it. She came out of the bedroom smiling, doing a little spin to show Michael how the dress flowed, and asked, "How do I look, my love?" Michael looked up from his phone, and instead of the compliment she expected, his face showed something that made her heart sink. He said, "Grace, that dress is nice, but maybe you should try something more fitted, something that shows your shape better. These flowing dresses just make you look bigger than you are." The words hung in the air between them, and Grace felt as though she had been slapped. She looked down at the dress, suddenly seeing it through his critical eyes rather than her own joy, and whispered, "I thought it was beautiful. I thought you would like it." Michael realized too late that he had hurt her, tried to backtrack saying, "It is beautiful, I just meant maybe for this particular event." But the damage was done. Grace changed into something else, a plainer outfit that made her feel self-conscious the entire evening. And Michael noticed how quiet she was during the dinner, how her usual warmth had been replaced by a careful guardedness. From that night forward, the comments became more frequent and more cutting. Michael began pointing out Grace's weight in ways that seemed designed to shame her rather than help her. "Grace, you are breathing heavily just from climbing the stairs. You need to do something about your weight. Grace, look at how much food you put on your plate. No wonder you keep getting bigger. Grace, have you considered joining a gym? My colleague's wife lost 20 pounds in 3 months at that new fitness center." Each comment landed like a stone on Grace's heart, crushing a little more of her spirit, making her question her worth and her place in Michael's life. She tried to laugh it off at first, making jokes about being well-fed and comfortable, but the jokes felt hollow even as she spoke them. She tried dieting, skipping meals and eating only salads, but stress and emotional pain would drive her back to food as comfort, and the weight refused to budge. She tried exercising, waking up early to jog around the neighborhood, but her knees hurt, and her body, which had carried so much for so many years, seemed to resist the sudden demands being placed on it. And all the while, Michael's criticism continued, relentless and cruel, each word carefully chosen to highlight her perceived inadequacy. The children noticed the change in their father's behavior toward their mother, though they were too young to fully understand what was happening. Blessing, now a teenager, would watch her father make cutting remarks about her mother's appearance and see the way her mother's smile would fade, replaced by a look of deep sadness that broke her young heart. She would go to her mother later and hug her tightly, whispering, "Mama, you are beautiful. Do not listen to what Daddy says." Victor, quieter and more observant than his energetic younger years had suggested he would become, stopped talking as much around his father, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in their family dynamic. The warmth that had once filled their home, that atmosphere of mutual support and shared struggle that had bonded them together, was being replaced by a cold tension that made everyone uncomfortable. Grace tried to maintain normalcy for the children's sake, continued cooking meals and helping with homework and organizing their lives, but the light had gone out of her eyes, and those who knew her well could see that she was suffering in silence. Michael's transformation accelerated when he met Vanessa at a business conference in Abuja. Vanessa was everything Grace was not, at least on the surface. She was tall and slim, with a model's figure maintained through rigorous diets and daily gym sessions. Her skin was lighter, artificially enhanced through expensive treatments and bleaching creams that cost more than most people earned in a month. She dressed in tight, revealing clothes that showcased her body, and she moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had always been told she was beautiful and had never experienced real hardship. Vanessa worked in marketing for a rival company, and she and Michael were seated next to each other during one of the conference panels. She flirted openly with him, touching his arm when she laughed at his comments, leaning close to whisper observations about the speaker, making it clear that she found him attractive and interesting. Michael, starved for the kind of attention and admiration he felt he deserved now that he had achieved success, responded to her advances eagerly. By the end of the conference, they had exchanged phone numbers, and within weeks they were seeing each other regularly, meeting at hotels and restaurants, building a relationship that existed in the shadows of Michael's marriage. Vanessa knew Michael was married, but she did not care. In fact, it seemed to add to the excitement for her. She would ask him mockingly, "What does your wife look like? Is she as beautiful as me?" And Michael, caught up in the intoxication of new romance and physical attraction, would say cruel things about Grace to impress this woman who meant nothing beyond the temporary pleasure she provided. He told Vanessa that Grace was fat and unattractive, that he had only married her because he was poor and desperate, that now that he had money and status, he deserved someone better, someone like Vanessa herself. These words, spoken in hotel rooms and restaurant booths, were betrayals far deeper than the physical infidelity, because they denied the truth of what Grace had meant to him, reduced years of sacrifice and love to nothing more than a transaction of convenience. Vanessa would laugh at his descriptions, would stroke his ego and tell him he was too handsome and successful to be stuck with such a woman, would plant seeds of resentment and entitlement that grew rapidly in the fertile soil of Michael's inflated sense of self-worth. At home, Michael's treatment of Grace deteriorated from criticism to outright cruelty. He stopped hiding his disgust with her appearance, would openly express his embarrassment at being seen with her in public. When they attended family gatherings or church events together, he would walk ahead of her, creating physical distance that communicated his desire not to be associated with her. When she tried to hold his hand as they used to do, he would pull away with an expression of annoyance that made her feel like a burden, something unwanted clinging to him against his will. He stopped eating the meals she prepared, claiming he was trying to eat healthier and her cooking was too heavy and fattening, though in reality he was eating expensive restaurant meals with Vanessa. He stopped sleeping in their bed, moving to the guest room under the excuse that her snoring kept him awake, though Grace knew she did not snore, and the real reason was that he could no longer stand to be close to her. Every small rejection accumulated into a mountain of pain that Grace carried silently, praying each night for God to change her husband's heart, to bring back the man who had once looked at her with love and gratitude. The cruelty reached its peak one Saturday morning when the family was gathered in the living room. Grace had prepared breakfast, a full spread of pancakes and eggs and fresh fruit, hoping to create a pleasant family morning like they used to have. She was wearing a new wrapper she had bought, bright red with gold patterns, and she had taken extra care with her appearance, wanting to please Michael. She called everyone to the table, her voice warm and inviting, and as Michael came down the stairs and saw her standing there, his face twisted with contempt. "Grace," he said loudly enough for the children to hear, "why do you insist on wearing those wrappers that make you look like you are carrying a sack of rice? Do you not have any shame, any awareness of how ridiculous you look?" The words struck Grace like physical blows, and she stood frozen, the serving spoon trembling in her hand. Blessing gasped and said, "Daddy, do not talk to Mama like that." But Michael turned his anger on his daughter, shouting at her to mind her business and show respect to her father. Victor started crying, frightened by the shouting, and Grace quickly moved to comfort him, but Michael blocked her path. "Look at yourself," he continued mercilessly, sweating like a Christmas goat, breathing like a broken generator, disgusting. "How did I ever marry someone like you?" Grace felt her knees weaken, felt the room spinning around her, and she had to grip the edge of the table to stay standing. Through tears that blurred her vision, she looked at this man she had sacrificed everything for and whispered, "Michael, what happened to you? Where is the man I married? How can you speak to me this way in front of our children?" But Michael was beyond reason, consumed by his own cruelty, and he simply waved his hand dismissively and walked out of the house, leaving his family in shocked silence. That night, after the children had gone to bed, still crying from the trauma of witnessing their father's cruelty toward their mother, Grace sat alone in the dark living room and made a decision. She could not continue living like this, being degraded and humiliated in her own home, watching her children suffer because of the toxic atmosphere their father had created. She picked up her phone and called David, Michael's older brother, a calm and principled man who had always treated her with kindness and respect. "Brother David," she said when he answered, her voice thick with tears. "I need your help. I cannot continue like this. Michael is destroying me and hurting our children with his behavior. Please, I am begging you to talk to him before I lose my mind completely." David listened to her pour out her pain, heard the desperate edge in her voice, and promised to come see Michael the following week at his office. Grace thanked him and ended the call, then sat in that dark room until morning came, praying and crying and wondering how love could transform so completely into hatred. True to his word, David showed up at Michael's office the next Tuesday without prior warning. Michael was in a meeting when his secretary knocked and informed him that his brother was there, insisting on seeing him immediately. Michael frowned, annoyed at the interruption, but excused himself and went to the reception area where David waited. "Brother, what brings you here?" Michael asked with false cheerfulness. "You should have called first. I could have cleared my schedule." David did not smile, did not engage in pleasantries, simply said, "We need to talk privately now." They went into Michael's office, and as soon as the door closed, David's controlled anger erupted. He told Michael exactly what he thought of his behavior, reminded him of the years when Grace had carried him financially and emotionally, listed every sacrifice she had made that had enabled Michael to reach the position he now occupied. "You have forgotten where you came from," David said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You have forgotten the woman who sold akara by the roadside so you could have transport money to job interviews, who washed other people's clothes so you could eat, who believed in you when you had given up on yourself. And now that you have money and a fancy title, she is suddenly not good enough for you. You disgust me, Michael. You truly disgust me." Michael sat behind his expensive desk, his face reddening with anger and shame as his brother's words hit their marks. He tried to defend himself, saying that Grace had let herself go, that she did not take care of her appearance, that he deserved a partner who matched his current status. But David cut him off sharply, asking, "And what status is that, Michael? The status of a man who abandons his wife for a woman who only wants his money? The status of a man who forgets his vows and treats the mother of his children like garbage? Is that the status you are so proud of?" He stood up and moved closer to Michael's desk, leaning forward so their faces were just inches apart. "Let me tell you something, brother. That woman you are humiliating gave you everything when you had nothing. She is the foundation of everything you have built. And if you continue down this path, you will lose not just her, but everything that truly matters. Your children's respect, your family's support, your own soul. Mark my words, Michael. Pride comes before a fall, and you are walking on very dangerous ground." With that final warning, David turned and walked out of the office, leaving Michael sitting alone with his thoughts, anger warring with the first uncomfortable stirrings of conscience. But pride is a powerful drug, and Michael was too deep in its grip to hear his brother's warning clearly. Instead of reflecting on his behavior and seeking to change, he directed his anger at Grace for, as he saw it, going behind his back to complain to his family. That evening when he returned home, he was breathing fire, his face contorted with rage. He stormed through the door and immediately began shouting for Grace, who emerged from the kitchen where she had been preparing dinner. "So," he said, advancing on her, "you went to report me to my brother. You want to make me look like a fool in front of my family, who gave you the right to discuss our private matters with anyone." Grace backed away from his anger, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Michael, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I only asked him to talk to you because you do not listen to me anymore. I thought maybe you would hear him. I just want our family to be happy again." But Michael was beyond reason, fueled by wounded pride and the knowledge that his brother's accusations had been accurate and that made them all the more unbearable. Before Grace could say anything more, Michael's hand shot out and connected with her face in a slap that echoed through the house like a gunshot. Grace stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, shock and pain written across her features. The children, who had been in their rooms doing homework, came running at the sound, and they stood in the hallway, witnessing their father's violence toward their mother, their young faces frozen in horror. "Daddy, no," Blessing screamed, running forward to put herself between her parents. But Michael pushed her aside roughly. Victor started crying hysterically, calling for his mother, and the scene descended into chaos and trauma. Michael, his rage still not spent, grabbed Grace's small bag from the chair where she always kept it and threw it toward the front door. "Get out," he shouted. "Get out of my house right now. I do not want to see your face here anymore. You are disgusting. You are worthless. And I am done with you. Leave now before I do something worse." Grace stood there, tears streaming down her face, her hand still pressed to her burning cheek, unable to believe that this was really happening, that the man she had loved and supported for so many years was actually throwing her out of their home. The children ran to their mother, wrapping their arms around her waist and legs, crying and begging their father not to make her leave. "Daddy, please," Blessing sobbed. "Please do not send Mama away. We need her. We love her. Please, Daddy." Victor could barely speak through his tears, just holding onto Grace's wrapper with desperate strength, his small body shaking. But Michael's heart had hardened beyond the reach of his children's pleas. He grabbed Grace's bag again and thrust it into her hands, then physically pushed her toward the door. "I said leave," he repeated, his voice cold and final. Grace looked at her children, their faces wet with tears, and she knelt down to hug them one last time. "My babies," she whispered, kissing their foreheads. "Mama loves you so much. I will never stop loving you. I promise I will see you again soon. Please be strong for me." She pulled away from their clinging hands, each separation feeling like tearing off a piece of her own flesh, and walked toward the door with her small bag clutched in her trembling hands. At the threshold, she turned back one last time, looking at Michael with eyes that held more sorrow than anger, and said quietly, "I pray that one day you will remember who I was to you before pride destroyed your heart." Then she walked out into the night, barefoot, because in the chaos she had forgotten her shoes, broken but not destroyed, cast out from the home she had helped build with her own sweat and tears. Grace walked through the dark streets, not knowing where to go, her mind numb with shock and her heart shattered into pieces that she was not sure could ever be reassembled. She had no money for a taxi, no phone credit to call anyone, and for a while she just walked aimlessly, tears flowing unchecked down her face. Eventually her feet carried her in the direction they knew best, toward the small house where her friend Patricia lived, a woman who had been her companion since childhood and who knew all of Grace's struggles and triumphs. When Grace finally reached Patricia's compound and knocked weakly on the gate, it was nearly midnight. Patricia, who had been asleep, woke to the insistent knocking and came to the gate with a flashlight, calling out to ask who was there at such an hour. When she opened the gate and saw Grace standing there in the darkness, barefoot and tear-stained with a swollen face and a small bag clutched to her chest, Patricia gasped and immediately pulled her friend inside. "Grace, what happened?" she asked urgently. "Why are you here like this? Who hurt you?" And Grace, who had been holding herself together through sheer willpower, finally collapsed into her friend's arms and broke down completely, sobbing so hard that her whole body shook, releasing hours and weeks and months of accumulated pain and humiliation. Patricia helped Grace inside, made her sit down, brought water and a wet cloth to clean her face, and listened as Grace told her everything through broken sentences and fresh tears. She told Patricia about Michael's transformation, about the constant criticism and mockery of her weight, about the emotional distance and coldness that had replaced love, about the fight tonight and the violence and being thrown out in front of their children. Patricia listened with growing horror and anger, occasionally wiping her own eyes as she heard how deeply her friend had been wounded. When Grace finished talking, Patricia held her hands tightly and spoke with fierce conviction. "Grace, you listen to me. You are one of the strongest, kindest, most beautiful women I know, inside and out. What Michael has done to you is evil and wrong, but you will survive this. I will help you. You can stay here as long as you need to, and we will figure out the next steps together. You are not alone, my sister. You hear me? You are not alone." Grace nodded weakly, too exhausted to speak, and Patricia led her to the spare bedroom, gave her clothes to change into, and stayed with her until she finally fell into a troubled sleep filled with dreams of her children's crying faces. The next morning, Grace woke to find Patricia had already gone to work, but had left breakfast on the table with a note that said, "Eat something, my sister. I will be back this afternoon. Rest and do not let your mind torment you. God is watching everything." Grace sat at the table staring at the food, but her appetite was gone, replaced by a hollow ache that had nothing to do with physical hunger. She thought about Blessing and Victor, wondered if they had slept, if Michael had comforted them or left them to cry themselves to sleep, if they understood why she had left, or if they thought she had abandoned them. The not knowing was torture, worse even than the pain of the slap or the humiliation of being thrown out. Because her children were her heart walking around outside her body, and being separated from them felt like slowly suffocating. She tried to pray, but the words would not come, her faith shaken by the cruelty of what had happened. And she wondered where God had been when her husband's hand struck her face, when her children screamed for her, when she walked barefoot through dark streets with nowhere to go. Meanwhile, back at the house that had been Grace's home, Michael wasted no time in bringing Vanessa into the space his wife had just vacated. Within 3 days of throwing Grace out, Vanessa moved in, bringing her expensive luggage and designer clothes and entitled attitude. The children watched in disbelief and growing resentment as this strange woman took over their mother's room, used their mother's kitchen, sat in their mother's chair. Vanessa made no effort to win the children over or even pretend to care about their feelings. When Blessing refused to greet her respectfully, Vanessa complained to Michael, who shouted at his daughter and sent her to her room without dinner. When Victor asked when his mother was coming back, Vanessa laughed mockingly and said, "Your mother is not coming back. I am here now. You better get used to it." The house that had once been filled with warmth and laughter became cold and tense, the children moving through it like quiet ghosts, speaking only when necessary, eating meals in silence, and spending as much time as possible locked in their rooms, away from their father and his new woman. Vanessa's true nature, which Michael had been too infatuated to see clearly before, began to reveal itself fully now that she had secured her position in his life and home. She was demanding and materialistic, constantly asking for money to buy things she claimed to need: new clothes, new shoes, salon treatments, spa days, expensive dinners at trendy restaurants. Michael, eager to please her and prove that he could provide the lifestyle she deserved, gave her whatever she wanted without question, spending lavishly to maintain her happiness. But Vanessa's happiness was a bottomless pit that could never be filled. There was always something more she wanted, something better she had seen someone else wearing, some new experience she absolutely had to have. She complained constantly about everything. The house was not big enough, the furniture was not modern enough, the car Michael had given her to use was not prestigious enough for someone of her standard. Michael found himself working longer hours to fund her lifestyle, taking on additional projects and responsibilities that added stress to his already demanding job, and yet, no matter how much he gave her, Vanessa always seemed slightly dissatisfied, always hinting that other men would treat her better, would give her more. Their relationship, built on physical attraction and mutual selfishness rather than genuine love or compatibility, quickly became toxic. They fought constantly, loud arguments that echoed through the house and frightened the children, about money, about respect, about Michael's time and attention. Vanessa had no patience for the children and made it clear that she viewed them as nuisances who got in the way of her relationship with Michael. She refused to cook for them, saying she was not their maid, refused to help them with anything, and complained when they made normal childhood noise. Blessing, protective of her younger brother and deeply resentful of this woman who had replaced their mother, became openly hostile toward Vanessa, refusing to follow her instructions and talking back whenever Vanessa tried to assert authority. This led to more arguments between Michael and his daughter, with Michael taking Vanessa's side and punishing Blessing harshly, damaging the relationship between father and daughter in ways that would take years to repair, if they ever could be repaired at all. During this time, Grace was slowly beginning to rebuild her life from the ruins Michael had left her with. Patricia introduced her to the manager at her own workplace, speaking highly of Grace's intelligence and reliability, and after a brief interview, Grace was offered a position as a secretary. The salary was modest, but it was enough to start with, enough to give Grace a sense of purpose and independence that she desperately needed. She threw herself into her new job with the same dedication she had brought to everything else in her life, arriving early, staying late, learning quickly, and proving herself invaluable. Her colleagues liked her, appreciated her warm personality and tireless work ethic, and within weeks she had become an integral part of the team. The work was a blessing in another way too. It kept her mind occupied during the day, gave her something to focus on besides the aching loneliness and the constant worry about her children. Patricia continued to support her emotionally, letting her stay in the spare room without asking for rent, cooking meals for her when she worked late, sitting up with her during the nights when grief overwhelmed her and she could not stop crying. But despite the new job and Patricia's faithful friendship, Grace's heart was broken in ways that time alone could not heal. Every night she thought about Blessing and Victor, imagined them going to bed without her goodnight kisses, wondered if they were eating properly and doing their homework and feeling loved. She had tried several times to call Michael to ask about the children, but he either refused to answer her calls or answered only to tell her coldly that the children were fine and none of her concern anymore. She considered going to the house to see them, but feared that Michael would create a scene or worse, have her arrested for trespassing, and the thought of her children seeing their mother dragged away by police was too horrible to contemplate. So she waited and prayed and hoped that somehow God would create an opportunity for her to see her babies again, to hold them and tell them that she had not abandoned them, that she thought about them every moment of every day, that they were the reason she kept going when everything in her wanted to give up. The opportunity came unexpectedly on a Saturday afternoon, about 2 months after she had been thrown out. Grace was at the market buying vegetables when she heard a familiar voice call her name. She turned and saw Blessing running toward her, Victor close behind, both children's faces lighting up with joy and relief at seeing their mother. Grace dropped her shopping bag and fell to her knees, opening her arms wide as her children crashed into her embrace. They held each other tightly, all three crying, while other market shoppers paused to watch this emotional reunion with curiosity and sympathy. "Mama," Blessing sobbed into Grace's shoulder. "We miss you so much. We have been looking for you everywhere. Victor said we saw Auntie Patricia at church last week, and she lives near here, so we came hoping to find you." Victor, still too young to articulate all his feelings in words, simply clung to his mother and repeated, "Mama, Mama, Mama," as if saying the word could keep her from disappearing again. Grace held her children and felt her heart, which had been empty and aching for so long, fill up again with a love so fierce and powerful that it hurt. "My babies," she whispered, kissing their faces over and over, "I have missed you more than words can say. Not a single day has passed that I have not thought about you and prayed for you." They talked quickly, hungrily, trying to fit weeks of separation into the precious minutes they had before the children would have to return home. The children told their mother about their unhappiness, about how much they hated Vanessa, about how their father had changed and was always angry, about how they cried every night wanting her back. Grace listened with a breaking heart, wanting to rescue them, to take them away from that toxic environment, but knowing she had no legal right and no financial means to support them on her own yet. She held their faces in her hands and looked into their eyes with all the love and strength she possessed. "Listen to me carefully, my darlings," she said. "I know life is hard right now. I know you are hurting and confused, but I need you to be strong just a little while longer. Mama is working now. I am building something, and one day soon I will come for you properly. But until then, you must take care of each other. You must do well in school. You must stay close to God. Can you do that for me?" Both children nodded solemnly, though tears continued to roll down their faces. Blessing, the older and more understanding of the two, asked, "Mama, does Daddy know we came to find you? Will he be angry with us?" Grace thought quickly, realizing that if Michael found out the children had seen her, he might punish them or prevent them from having any contact with her in the future. She said gently, "Let this be our secret for now. Do not tell your father or that woman about seeing me. Go home and act as if you went to play at your friend's house. I do not want you to get in trouble, but remember always that Mama loves you and is fighting to come back to you." The children reluctantly agreed, understanding that revealing their meeting might have consequences they were not ready to face. Grace gave them the little money she had in her purse, told them to buy snacks or save it for something they needed, and hugged them one final time before watching them walk away. She stood there in the middle of the market, watching their retreating figures until they disappeared from view, and then she sat down right there on the ground and wept, not caring who saw or what they thought. A kind elderly woman came and sat beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders and saying softly, "My daughter, whatever pain you are carrying, give it to God. He sees everything and he will fight for you when the time is right." Grace thanked the woman and eventually collected herself enough to walk back to Patricia's house. But the encounter had reopened wounds that had barely begun to scab over, and that night she cried herself to sleep again, hugging a pillow and wishing it was her children in her arms. For Michael, life appeared successful on the surface, but was slowly deteriorating in ways he was too proud to acknowledge. At work, his performance had declined significantly, as his personal life chaos affected his concentration and judgment. He made mistakes on projects that he would never have made before, missed important deadlines, and showed up to meetings unprepared. His supervisors noticed the change and were concerned, calling him in for performance reviews where they expressed disappointment in his recent work quality. Michael made excuses, blaming stress and external factors, but he refused to admit that the root cause was his own choices, his decision to destroy his marriage for a superficial relationship, his decision to prioritize pleasure over responsibility. The stress from work, combined with the stress of maintaining Vanessa's expensive lifestyle, began to weigh heavily on him, and he developed headaches that would not go away and difficulty sleeping even with medication. At home, things were even worse. Vanessa's demands had become outrageous. She wanted a new car, a luxury SUV that cost more than Michael earned in a year. When he tried to explain that he could not afford it right now, she flew into a rage, accusing him of being cheap, of not loving her enough, of probably still giving money to his fat ex-wife behind her back. She threatened to leave him, saying she had other men interested in her, richer men who would give her what she deserved without hesitation. Michael, terrified of losing her and facing the reality that he had destroyed his family for nothing, scrambled to find ways to get the money. He took out loans, maxed out credit cards, even borrowed from colleagues at work, all to buy Vanessa the SUV she demanded. When he finally presented her with the car keys, she smiled and kissed him, but the gratitude lasted only a few days before she found something new to complain about. The leather seats were not the right color. The sound system was not premium enough. Why did he get this model instead of the newer one? Michael felt exhausted and trapped, realizing too late that he was in a relationship with someone who saw him as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, but his pride prevented him from admitting his mistake or taking steps to correct it. The children continued to suffer in this toxic environment, their grades dropping at school, their spirits crushed by the constant tension at home. Blessing, who had once been a happy, outgoing child, became withdrawn and angry, getting into fights at school and talking back to teachers. Victor developed anxiety and began wetting his bed again, something he had not done since he was a toddler. Michael was too consumed with his own problems to notice or care about what his children were going through, dismissing their behavioral issues as normal teenage rebellion or childish acting out. He had no awareness that he was failing as a father in the most fundamental ways, that his children needed his protection and guidance and were instead receiving neglect and indirect abuse through his association with a woman who openly disliked them. One Friday evening, Michael came home from work earlier than usual, wanting to surprise Vanessa with news that he had secured a bonus at work. He had been planning to use the bonus money to pay down some of his debts, but he thought maybe he could use part of it to take Vanessa on a weekend trip somewhere nice, something to ease the constant fighting and restore some harmony to their relationship. He walked into the house quietly and heard voices coming from the living room. Vanessa's voice and a man's voice he did not recognize. He moved closer, a sick feeling growing in his stomach, and when he reached the doorway and looked in, he saw Vanessa sitting very close to another man on the couch, her hand on his thigh, their heads bent close together as they laughed at something on her phone. The scene was intimate in a way that made Michael's blood run cold, and he stood there frozen for a moment before rage took over. "Vanessa," he shouted, "what is going on here? Who is this man?" Both Vanessa and the stranger jumped up, startled by Michael's sudden appearance, and Vanessa's face showed annoyance rather than guilt. "This is David," she said casually. "He is a friend. We were just talking." "Why are you shouting?" The man, looking uncomfortable now, started to make excuses and move toward the door, but Michael blocked his path. "A friend," Michael repeated, his voice shaking, "a friend who sits with you like that in my house while I am at work paying for everything you have." Vanessa rolled her eyes and said something that would haunt Michael for the rest of his life. "Michael, calm down. You are always overreacting. You know what? I am tired of this. I am tired of you. You are not as rich as you pretended to be. You cannot even afford to give me the lifestyle I deserve. I have been seeing David on the side because he treats me better than you do. He does not ask questions or complain about money, and honestly, he is better in every way. So maybe it is time I just moved on completely." The words hit Michael like a physical assault, each sentence a knife to his chest. He looked at this woman he had destroyed his marriage for, this woman he had sacrificed his family to be with, and saw her for what she truly was: cold, selfish, cruel, using him for what he could provide and discarding him the moment someone better came along. The stranger, David, took advantage of Michael's shock to slip past him and hurry out the front door, leaving Michael alone with Vanessa. Michael tried to speak, but found he could barely breathe, his chest tight with a pain that was not physical but felt like a heart attack nonetheless. Vanessa picked up her purse and started gathering some of her things, saying, "I will come back for the rest of my stuff later, thanks for the car though," and she actually laughed as she walked toward the door. Michael, his mind reeling, tried to stop her, reaching out to grab her arm, saying, "Vanessa, please, we can work this out. Do not leave like this." But she pulled away from him with disgust on her face. "Work what out, Michael? You have nothing left to offer me. No money, no excitement, just stress and bills and those annoying kids of yours. I am done. Find someone else to use. Or better yet, go crawl back to that fat wife you threw away. Maybe she will take pity on you." She walked out the door, got into the SUV that Michael had gone into debt to buy her, and drove away without looking back, leaving him standing in the doorway of his empty house. Michael stood there for a long time, unable to process what had just happened, unable to accept that everything had fallen apart so completely. The house was quiet except for the sound of his own breathing, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard his brother David's voice from months ago saying, "Pride comes before a fall, and you are walking on very dangerous ground." That night, Michael sat alone in his living room in the dark, not bothering to turn on lights, and took stock of his life. His wife, the woman who had loved him unconditionally and sacrificed everything for him, was gone, driven away by his cruelty. His children barely spoke to him anymore, their eyes filled with resentment and hurt whenever they looked at him. His finances were in ruins, destroyed by his efforts to maintain Vanessa's lifestyle. He had loans to repay, credit card debts that were accumulating interest, and a depleted savings account. His reputation at work was damaged, his supervisors losing confidence in his abilities. And the woman he had thought was worth all these sacrifices had just revealed herself to be a shallow, manipulative person who had never cared about him at all. Michael felt the weight of his mistakes crushing him, and for the first time since his transformation had begun, he allowed himself to truly see what he had done, how he had destroyed everything good in his life through pride and foolishness. He thought about Grace, remembered her gentle voice and her loyal heart, and all the ways she had supported him when he was nothing. And he realized with devastating clarity that he had thrown away a diamond to chase after broken glass. Tears began to fall from his eyes, tears of regret and shame and desperate grief for everything he had lost. In his emotional turmoil, Michael made a decision that would have permanent consequences. He grabbed his car keys with shaking hands and walked out to his car, not sure where he was going, but unable to stay in that house another moment, surrounded by the evidence of his failures. He started the engine and drove into the night, rain beginning to fall as if the sky itself was weeping for his ruined life. His mind was not on the road. His thoughts were spinning wildly between memories of Grace and images of Vanessa laughing with another man and his children's sad faces. He drove faster than he should have, recklessly, and when he reached a major intersection, he ran a red light without even seeing it. A massive truck was coming from the perpendicular road, and its driver tried to brake but could not stop in time. The collision was catastrophic, metal crunching and glass exploding as Michael's car was hit on the driver's side and sent spinning across the intersection before slamming into a concrete barrier. The sound of the impact echoed through the rainy night, and then everything went silent except for the hiss of the damaged engine and the steady fall of rain on twisted metal. Emergency services arrived within minutes, extracting Michael from the wreckage and rushing him to the hospital. He was unconscious, his body broken in multiple places, and the paramedics worked frantically to keep him alive during the transport. At the hospital, doctors operated through the night to repair the damage, setting broken bones and stopping internal bleeding and assessing the full extent of his injuries. Michael's brother David received a call in the early morning hours from the hospital, and he raced there immediately, his heart filled with dread. When the doctor finally came out to talk to him, the news was serious, but not as bad as David had feared. "Your brother is alive," the doctor said, "but his injuries are severe. Both of his legs were badly crushed in the accident. We have done what we can, but he is going to need extensive rehabilitation, and he will not be able to walk for many months, possibly longer. He will need to use a wheelchair during his recovery. David closed his eyes and said a prayer of thanks that Michael had survived, even as his heart ached for the difficult road ahead. When Michael finally regained consciousness 2 days later, the first thing he became aware of was pain, deep throbbing pain throughout his body, but especially concentrated in his legs. He tried to move them and could not, and panic flooded through him. A nurse noticed he was awake and called for the doctor, who came and gently explained his condition. "Mr. Anderson, you were in a very serious accident. You are lucky to be alive, but your legs sustained significant damage. We have stabilized them, but you will not be able to walk for quite some time. You are going to need physical therapy and a lot of patience." Michael stared at the ceiling, processing this information, and felt something inside him break completely. He had lost everything: his wife, his children's love, his financial stability, his pride, and now his ability to walk, to be independent, to function as a fully capable man. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes and ran down into his hair, and he turned his face away from the doctor and nurse, not wanting them to see his anguish. David visited him every day during his hospital stay, bringing food and necessities, sitting beside his bed in silence when Michael did not want to talk, which was most of the time. Michael could barely look at his brother, remembering how David had warned him, had told him exactly what would happen if he continued down the path of pride and cruelty, and Michael had ignored him completely. One afternoon, David broke the silence between them. "Michael," he said gently, "I know you are hurting and I am not going to lecture you, but you need to start thinking about what comes next. You cannot stay in the hospital forever. You will need help at home during your recovery, someone to care for you and help you with daily tasks. What are you planning to do?" Michael closed his eyes, humiliation washing over him. "I do not know," he whispered. "Vanessa is gone. She left me even before this accident. I have no one." David nodded slowly. "What about Grace? Have you thought about reaching out to her?" Michael's eyes shot open, and he looked at his brother with an expression of such shame and pain that David's heart ached for him. "Grace," Michael repeated bitterly. "Why would Grace ever help me? After everything I did to her, I mocked her, I humiliated her, I threw her out of our home in front of our children. I replaced her with a woman who turned out to care nothing about me. Why would she give me the time of day, let alone help me now when I am broken and pathetic?" David pulled his chair closer to the hospital bed and spoke with conviction. "Because Grace is not like you, Michael. She does not operate from a place of revenge or conditional love. She loved you truly, sacrificed for you genuinely, and I believe she still has a good heart despite how badly you wounded her. I am not saying she will take you back or that she owes you anything, but she might be willing to forgive you if you approach her with real humility and genuine repentance. Not manipulation, not pretending, but actual acknowledgement of your wrongs and asking for her forgiveness." Michael was quiet for a long time, thinking about what his brother had said, weighing his pride against his desperate need. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do not deserve her forgiveness, I know that. But you are right that I need to try. Not because I want something from her, but because I need her to know that I finally see what I threw away. That I understand now what she was worth and what I did wrong. Will you help me, David? Will you reach out to her for me, because I do not even know where she is, or if she would answer a call from me?" David nodded. "I will find her, and I will tell her about your condition and that you want to speak to her. But after that, it is up to her whether she comes or not. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that she might refuse, and you would have to respect that decision." Michael agreed, knowing he had no right to expect anything from Grace, but hoping desperately that she might show him mercy he did not deserve. David made inquiries and discovered through family connections that Grace was living with her friend Patricia and working as a secretary at a company in the city. He went to her workplace one afternoon and waited in the reception area until her lunch break. When Grace came down and saw David sitting there, her face showed surprise and immediate concern. "Brother David," she said, walking toward him quickly, "is something wrong? Are the children okay?" David stood and greeted her respectfully, then asked if they could talk somewhere private. They went to a small cafe nearby and sat across from each other. And David explained everything: the accident, Michael's injuries, his broken condition physically and emotionally, and his desire to see Grace and ask her forgiveness. Grace listened in silence, her face going through a range of emotions: shock when she heard about the accident, pain when she imagined Michael hurt, and then something more complicated, a mixture of sympathy and the remembered agony of how he had treated her. When David finished speaking, Grace sat quietly for several minutes, staring at her hands folded on the table. David waited patiently, not rushing her, understanding that what he was asking was enormous. Finally, Grace looked up and spoke. "Brother David," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion, "I will not pretend that I do not still feel the pain of what Michael did to me. He broke my heart in ways I did not know were possible. He made me feel worthless and ugly. He threw me away like garbage after I gave him everything I had. But despite all that, I cannot find it in my heart to wish him harm or to refuse him when he is suffering. My faith teaches me to forgive those who wrong me, and though forgiveness is hard, I want to choose it because carrying bitterness is a burden I do not want anymore." David felt relief wash over him and reached across the table to pat her hand. "Grace, you are a remarkable woman. Michael does not deserve your kindness, but I am grateful you are willing to extend it." Grace nodded. "I will come to see him," she said, "but I need you to understand that seeing him and forgiving him does not mean I am taking him back, or that everything will return to how it was. Some things once broken cannot be fully repaired. I just want to offer him peace and let go of my own pain." David agreed completely, understanding that forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing and that Grace had every right to set whatever boundaries she needed. The next day, David brought Grace to the hospital. She walked through the corridors beside him, her heart beating fast with nervousness and uncertainty about what she would feel when she saw Michael again. They reached his room, and David knocked softly before opening the door. Michael was sitting up in bed, thinner than Grace remembered, his face drawn with pain and exhaustion, and when he saw her walk in, his eyes filled with tears immediately. "Grace," he whispered, "you came. I did not think you would." Grace stood at the foot of the bed, maintaining some distance, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. She looked at this man who had once been her whole world, saw him vulnerable and broken, and felt her heart softening despite everything. Michael spoke first, his words tumbling out in a rush of emotion. "Grace, I do not know where to begin. I do not have words adequate to express how sorry I am for what I did to you. I was cruel and heartless and blind. I took your love and your sacrifice, and I threw it back in your face. I mocked you for your appearance, when your appearance was never what mattered. What mattered was your heart, and your character, and your loyalty. All the things I was too foolish and proud to value until I lost them." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, and continued, "I destroyed our family for a woman who never cared about me, who was only interested in what I could give her, and the moment I could not give her everything she wanted, she left without a second thought. And I deserved that. I deserved to be abandoned the way I abandoned you. I deserved to lose everything because I did not appreciate what I had when I had it." Grace listened, seeing genuine remorse in his face, hearing it in his voice, and she knew this was not manipulation but real recognition of his failures. Michael looked directly at her now, his eyes red and swollen. "I am not asking you to take me back," he said. "I know I have no right to ask that. I am not even asking you to help me or care for what happens to me. I only want you to know that I am sorry, truly and deeply sorry, and that I finally understand what I lost when I lost you. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too blind to see it." Grace felt tears running down her own face now, years of pain and anger and grief releasing through those tears, and she uncrossed her arms and moved closer to the bed. "Michael," she said softly, "what you did to me hurt more than I can express. You broke me in ways I am still healing from, but I forgive you. I choose to forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I need to let go of this pain. I need to move forward with my life, and I cannot do that while carrying hatred and bitterness." Michael broke down completely then, sobbing like a child, and Grace surprised herself by reaching out and taking his hand. They sat like that for several minutes, holding hands while both cried, releasing years of accumulated emotion, and in that hospital room, something began to heal. Not their marriage necessarily, but the deep soul wounds they had both been carrying. After they had both composed themselves somewhat, Grace spoke again. I forgive you, Michael, but I want you to understand that forgiveness does not erase what happened or mean that everything can go back to how it was. I have built a new life now. I have a job and my own sense of purpose, and I am not the same woman you threw out. I am stronger now, and I know my worth. Michael nodded, understanding. I know, he said, and I respect that. I just hope that maybe, even if we cannot be husband and wife again, maybe we can find a way to be civil for the children's sake. They need both of us, Grace. They need to see us cooperating even if we are not. Together. Grace agreed. The children do need both of us, and I have missed them desperately every day since I left. I want to be part of their lives again. Michael looked at her with gratitude. They ask about you all the time, he admitted. They are angry with me, and rightly so. I have failed them as a father. But if you would be willing to see them, to be present in their lives again, it would mean everything to them and to me. Over the following weeks, Grace visited Michael regularly in the hospital, and then when he was discharged, she helped coordinate his care at home. She did not move back in with him, but she came several times a week to help with his physical therapy exercises, to make sure he was eating properly, to help him manage the daily tasks that were difficult or impossible for someone in a wheelchair. She did this not because she owed him anything, but because she had genuinely forgiven him, and because she wanted to model for her children what grace and mercy looked like in practice. The children were overjoyed to have their mother back in their lives, and slowly, gradually, the family began to heal, even though it looked different than it had before. Blessing and Victor split their time between their parents, sometimes staying with Grace at Patricia's house and sometimes staying with Michael at his house. And though it was not perfect and there were still difficult moments and complicated emotions, it was better than the toxic situation they had been living in. Michael worked hard at his physical therapy, motivated by a desire to walk again, but also by a deeper desire to prove that he had learned from his mistakes and become a better man. It took months of painful effort, exercises that left him exhausted and frustrated, days when progress seemed impossible, but Grace was there encouraging him, reminding him that healing takes time, that recovery is not linear, that setbacks do not mean failure. Eventually, after almost a year of intensive therapy, Michael took his first independent steps with the help of a walker, and Grace was there to witness it, clapping and smiling with genuine happiness at his achievement. They had not reconciled romantically, both understanding that too much damage had been done for that kind of relationship to be rebuilt, but they had found something perhaps more valuable: mutual respect, genuine friendship, and a shared commitment to co-parenting their children well. One evening, as Grace was preparing to leave after helping Michael with his exercises, he asked her to sit down for a moment because there was something he wanted to say. Grace sat, curious, and Michael spoke carefully, choosing his words with thought. Grace, he began, I have been doing a lot of reflecting during this recovery period, thinking about my life and my choices and what really matters, and I want you to know that meeting you and marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Even though I spent years acting like it was a burden, the truth is, you saved my life in more ways than one. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You sacrificed for our family when I had nothing to give, and you showed me what real love looks like, even though I was too blind to recognize it for too long. He paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him, then continued, I know we cannot go back to being married. I know I destroyed that possibility through my own actions. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see your worth, I see your beauty inside and out, and I am grateful that despite everything, you chose to forgive me and help me and give our children the gift of having both their parents present in their lives. Even if we are not together, you could have walked away completely, and no one would have blamed you. But you chose mercy instead, and that is something I will never forget. Grace felt tears rising again, moved by the sincerity in his words and by how far he had come from the prideful, cruel man he had been. Thank you for saying that, Michael, she said softly. I needed to hear it. Not because I need your validation, but because it helps to know that the pain I went through was not for nothing, that you actually learned from it and grew. That is all any of us can hope for, really, to learn from our mistakes and become better people. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Grace stood to leave. As she walked toward the door, Michael called out one more thing. "Grace," he said, and she turned back to look at him. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "I wish I had told you that every day when we were together. I wish I had appreciated you instead of criticizing you. I wish I had seen what was right in front of me before I lost it." Grace smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and said, "Thank you, Michael. That means more than you know." And then she left, walking out into the evening with a lighter heart than she had carried in years. The story of Michael and Grace became known in their community, told as a cautionary tale about pride and its consequences, but also as a story about the power of forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. People who had watched Michael's rise to wealth and his cruel treatment of his wife now saw his fall and his humbling, and many drew lessons from it. The elderly in the community nodded wisely and said, "We told you. We told you that pride comes before a fall, that a man who forgets where he came from will eventually be reminded in painful ways, that beauty fades, but character lasts forever." Young men who had looked up to Michael as a symbol of success were forced to reconsider what success really meant. Whether accumulating wealth and status while destroying your family could truly be called success. Whether the praise of strangers was worth more than the love of those closest to you. Young women looked at Grace's story and drew strength from it, seeing that a woman's worth is not determined by her size or her appearance, but by the content of her character, and that choosing dignity and forgiveness in the face of cruelty is a form of power all its own. Years passed, and the Anderson family continued to heal and grow in their new configuration. Blessing grew into a strong, compassionate young woman who had learned from her parents' story both what to do and what not to do in relationships. She watched her mother's strength and her father's transformation and internalized lessons about forgiveness, humility, and the importance of character over appearance. Victor, too, grew up with a deep respect for his mother and a complicated but ultimately positive relationship with his father, understanding that people can change and that mistakes, even terrible ones, do not have to define a person forever if they are willing to learn from them. Michael eventually regained his ability to walk without assistance, though he would always have a slight limp that served as a permanent reminder of the darkest period of his life. He never remarried, focusing instead on rebuilding his relationship with his children and maintaining his friendship with Grace, who he continued to see as one of the most remarkable people he had ever known. Grace, for her part, flourished in her independence. She was promoted several times at her job, eventually becoming an office manager with a good salary and respect from her colleagues. She moved into her own small apartment, modest but comfortable, and she filled it with things that brought her joy, plants and books, and pictures of her children. She lost some weight naturally over time, not through extreme dieting or obsessive exercise, but simply through the reduced stress of living in peace rather than constant emotional turmoil, though her size was never again something she felt ashamed of or allowed others to make her feel bad about. She dated occasionally, but was in no rush to remarry, having learned that being alone was far better than being with someone who did not value her. Her children remained her priority and her joy, and watching them grow into good, kind, successful adults was the greatest reward she could have asked for. On the 10th anniversary of the night Michael had thrown her out, Grace sat on her small balcony, watching the sunset, and reflected on everything that had happened since then. She thought about the pain and humiliation she had endured, the nights of crying and wondering if she would survive the heartbreak, the struggle to rebuild her life from nothing. But she also thought about the strength she had discovered in herself, the depth of her capacity for forgiveness, the peace that came from letting go of bitterness. She realized that while she would not have chosen to go through such suffering, it had shaped her into someone she was proud to be, someone who knew her worth regardless of what others thought, someone who could face adversity without being destroyed by it. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, thanking God for bringing her through the fire and for the lessons learned in the furnace of affliction. Michael, in his own home across the city, sat in his living room that same evening, looking at old photographs from when his children were young, when Grace was still his wife, when their family was whole, even if they were poor. He looked at Grace's face in those pictures, glowing with love and hope, and felt a deep sadness for all the years he had wasted not appreciating her. But he also felt gratitude that despite his failures, he had been given a second chance to be a better man, a better father, and a true friend to the woman who deserved so much more than he had given her. He had learned the hardest way possible that external beauty fades and wealth can be lost, and status means nothing. But kindness and loyalty and genuine love are treasures beyond price. And the person who fails to recognize and honor those qualities when they are freely offered is a fool destined for regret. The moral of this story, whispered among those who tell it and retell it, is simple but profound. Pride blinds us to the blessings right in front of us, making us chase after illusions while neglecting reality. A person's worth cannot be measured by their appearance or their size, but only by the content of their character and the love in their heart. Cruelty and mockery of those who have sacrificed for us brings consequences that may not come immediately but will certainly come eventually, for karma is patient, but it never forgets. And perhaps most importantly, forgiveness is not weakness, but the highest form of strength, the choice to release bitterness and choose peace, even when we have every right to hold on to anger. And in that choice, we find our own freedom and healing. Michael learned that a man who mocks his wife for being fat, while forgetting that she carried him when he was nothing, is a man who will one day find himself with nothing. And karma, that silent teacher, will ensure the lesson is learned thoroughly and completely. Written not just in words, but in the very circumstances of life itself, teaching us all that what we give out into the world eventually returns to us. And those who sow cruelty should not be surprised when they reap suffering, just as those who sow kindness and forgiveness will eventually reap peace and restoration. This is not a fairy tale, it is life in its rawest form, showing us that our choices matter, that how we treat others has real consequences, and that it is never too late to change, to seek forgiveness, and to become better than we were. Though the cost of learning these lessons through suffering is high, and the scars may remain even after the wounds have healed.